Thanks for being here, everyone. My name is Anastasia Bolton, and I am helping SPJ on a task force to come up with hopefully some universal solutions for mental health, or at least we're talking about it, how to come up with solutions. Whether they're going to be universal or solution oriented remains to be seen, but we're trying, right? So I am so grateful that all three of you here to share your time and your expertise. We're hoping that this discussion and really information helps journalists who have unfortunately been laid off or are facing layoffs. And each of you bring a very interesting and helpful perspective, I believe, and helpful information. So just briefly introduce yourselves and we'll go from there. Anyone?
Well, I'm unmiked, so I will go first. So I'm Patricia Whitehouse. I'm the owner of North Star People Solutions. Been in the field of human resources for quite a few years, but in my business and how I'm involved with this group is really through the kind of employee advocacy piece that I feel sharing from a different perspective is why I'm here today. And hopefully I will learn something from our other amazing co-panelists.
Thanks, Patricia. I'll go next. My name is Rangel. I'm a working journalist. I've been in TV for about 12 years. I live in Austin, Texas, and I'm also a mental wellness and mindfulness coach for journalists. So my work in both my reporting as well as my coaching is really at the center of social justice and equity, and with the complete understanding, I believe, that things like burnout and layoffs are really a reflection of the systemic issues in journalism. And so by no means do I think mindfulness will help solve the issues happening in our industry. However, it's a good point to self-reflect and see what are the tiny ways that we self-betrayal some of these things that can add into this already really heavy topic of burnout and dealing with your mental health as a journalist.
Thank you for that. I can't wait to get into that. There's a lot there. My name is Katherine Kokal. I'm an education reporter based in West Palm Beach, Florida. I'm the founder of the Journalism Community Aid Network, which is an online resource for people to start mutual aid networks to help folks who are laid off. The whole website stemmed from my own experience creating a mutual aid network when my company laid off 600 people in 2022, and we mobilized to raise money to help them with emergency expenses, connect them with new jobs, and provide moral support in a really uncertain time. So I'm excited for this conversation.
I should point out that all of the things that you guys have provided us in terms of knowledge and resources are all posted on the SPJ website. And hopefully there's going to be a link right to this particular meeting. But let me start from mental health, right? And I'm going to go to you, Leslie. Talk to me about, like, if there's 1, 2, 5 top things that you feel in your experience that people should be looking out for that could help them cope. Is cope the right word to describe a layoff?
Yeah, thanks so much. So I think when we think about journalists' mental wellness and mental health through the lens of layoffs, it's important to acknowledge that a layoff is really, it can be traumatic, right? It's something that folks likely weren't planning for. It's something that there could be grief attached to. And by definition, any trauma by definition is anything that your body doesn't know how to respond to. And so a lot of times journalists may feel in this limbo of what just happened, how could this happen? Some of the emotions that might be coming up are anger, self-blame, guilt, definitely imposter syndrome, self-doubt, also disrespect, feeling violated, jealous, angry, a whole host of things. And it's important to understand that these feelings are absolutely normal. And as I mentioned earlier, like, it's important to remember that a layoff is not reflective of your individual character, your individual work ethic. It's, again, a reflection of the systemic failures that are happening in the journalism industry and with your previous employer. And so when we think about coping, it's important to take some time off. It my work is really through the lens of thought work, so neurolinguistic programming and the thoughts that live in our mind. So we can think about what's that soundtrack that we're always telling ourselves, and if it's mean and it's ugly, just paying attention to what are those daily thoughts that are coming in. So taking some time off to grieve, right? I believe that rejection is always a redirection and in sometimes protection. And so if there is space to begin to look at a layoff in that lens, that might be something to consider. But again, knowing that all of these mixed feelings are absolutely normal, they are okay. It's okay to give yourself time to grieve. It's okay to spend time reflecting on the work that you've done. And I'd also like to share, when we think about this grief from losing a job, and I know I have friends who they've been laid off in this most recent round, and the people that I'm seeing are journalists of color who these were their dream jobs, and the implication that that has further beyond just the layoff, right? And so taking the time to recognize that even just through this grief, when we think about grief can be simply looked at, it's all of the unexpressed love and pride that you had for the work that you've been doing in your community. And so take some time to just spend time with loved ones, spend time with friends, connect with people, being in connection. And again, understanding that this is not a reflection of you, it's unfortunately a reflection of our industry. So I've said a lot. I'll pause right there and let my panelists, fellow panelists, share some thoughts.
I want to get to Katherine last, not because it's the least important. Not everybody's equally important here, but I want to go to Patricia for the HR perspective. And the HR perspective is difficult, right? Because the HR folks had to probably deliver the news if it was done properly, right? Some people are, I'm reading, finding out about layoffs through, I believe, articles in the New York Times. I've read that yesterday. And so what should people who have been already laid off or are in the process of, Patricia, what should they be asking their companies, their HR professionals? What resources should they ask, or if they have legal right to demand to get some assistance or some questions answered?
So thank you for that, and thank you, Leslie. I loved your comments as well. So I unfortunately have had to deliver the layoff message for many individuals, and so I do have a slightly different perspective. And to Anastasia's point, oftentimes it's not delivered well, or it's not delivered directly. And so that is something that upsets me greatly. And so, but it is what it is. And so sharing information about who should you ask, where can you go to get more information is, I think, extremely important. And there really, for me, those are four main categories. The first really talks a little bit about what Leslie shared, and that's about what resources or things can I do as it relates to how I am processing this, my overall well-being, what are benefits available? Are there discounted services with my medical insurance so I can get counseling? Have you opened up the employee assistance program and I can, urgently assess it? Are there articles available that, relate to what we're experiencing? Are there resources for my family? As well, because there's a lot of journalists that are not going through this alone. Their whole families are going through the layoff. So what resources might be available to the family? So I think that first question is investigating at your individual company what resources you might have available through them. And sometimes those are hidden in the letters or the agreements or on the website. But so I would say dig. And so devote, some time, block out an hour on your calendar to really kind of explore that as it relates to your own well-being. The second category I really think is about communicating the message. So not only you're processing this, but how am I sharing this message with my family, with my friends, and even, potential future employers as well? So how am I processing that? And what kind of resources are available to me? If it's the first time you've been laid off or the fifth time, it's very difficult and often can be different. And so tapping into resources about how am I communicating this message is really kind of the second category that I think is extremely important. Often those are available through your employee assistance program. I know that I've utilized like a 14-page document that really walks through all those nuances. So within that document, there may be something that really rings true to you, and a tool and a technique that might be helpful. The third category is, as Anastasia said, navigating all of the nuances of the process, right? Do I have a severance when do I file for unemployment? When do my benefits start? Are there career counseling services available? And so making a list in a quiet moment to reflect, like, what are some things that I want to ask? Are there ongoing career support? What are all of those? I think is extremely important so that you can explore those resources available. What I will tell you is really reading through any kind of severance package information is critical. And I can't tell you how many times someone hasn't read it because it is so emotional. And so I totally get that. Maybe day one, it's not the day, but take the time to read through it, and questions that you might have, make sure that you're reaching out. The second is the unemployment benefits. There are resources that we added in our link so that you know what information you might need and how quickly to apply for those benefits. And you should never feel like, oh gosh, this is not good, I'm applying for unemployment. That is a benefit that is really going to help carry you through this difficult process. So definitely do that right away. And then there are many financial and community resources available to you. Some may be provided by your employer, some others, but helping you to navigate, like, can I put a pause on loans? Do I reach out to my credit card companies? What are some of the things to really navigate some of the finances of things? And then my fourth and final component is the career component. So I agree. I can't think of a single person in any role that didn't love their job. And this was quite shocking and kind of a horrific moment. But for some, they're like, what do I want to do next? Do I want to stay in this industry? Do I want to go elsewhere? So really that fourth component is now starting to think about, what do I want to do next, and where and how? And oftentimes organizations do have those resources, but they may be for a limited window of time. So you don't want to miss those windows. So looking through that and mapping that out, like, oh, I need to call them by this point, in order to get one-on-one career coaching, counseling, or something of that nature. So again, want to leave time for the rest of our panelists, but thank you for letting me share a little feedback.
Ooh, you said so many things that I want to follow up on, so many things that really make me feel things as a human, as a reporter, but maybe I'll get to follow up later. Katherine, journalists, I think it's fair to say that many of us are in this profession because we want to tell people what's going on, and we want to inspire institutional change, and we like when people get together and do something to make a difference. And so you did that very thing for journalists. You got everybody together to help each other. So talk about that, and how people can rally together now, and how your website can help them organize and stand up some resources that could be available right this minute.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to. And those suggestions are so good. A lot of them are things that I collected from people to put on my website for people who are laid off, like step by step, here is step one. And so Patricia's point about reading the severance agreement, like read it all the way through, share it with your lawyer if you have one and you can, because all of that is so important in understanding what comes next and when payments will come through, when benefits start and end. So I can't echo that enough. But the reason why I started this was because my company laid off at first 400 people and then another 200 people. And in the days after the layoffs were announced, but the people were not notified yet, I and other journalists thought about how we can support them. And you feel so helpless when layoffs are happening. Whether you are laid off, people in your newsroom are laid off, people in your company who aren't in the newsroom are laid off. Like, I was so tired of feeling so helpless when this happened. And so we decided to do something about it. And I thought about all of the ways that a layoff impacts your life, because it's no longer like getting laid off, just losing the job, find another one, okay. It's everything. It's health insurance benefits. It's networking and social relationships. I've had relationships with people for years in my newsrooms and even newsrooms across the country that just go away because someone has left the company, and there's a grieving process there, right? And so the thought process was, in 2022, how can we wrap our arms around the people who are impacted, spread the love and the wealth, quite literally, and make people realize that they are not alone? Because a layoff is an incredibly isolating feeling. Even if you see the headline that 600 other people lost their job, you feel like you are on an island. And people told me, I felt like I had been shunned. And so the process of creating the Community Aid Network really focused on helping people financially with extremely urgent short-term financial help that was all community given. So just whoever could Venmo our group, we could get it out in the right spot. Job resources, job fairs, resume review, networking events that people signed up for, moral support. So like handwritten cards going to people's homes with a $5 Starbucks gift card, just saying, hey, you rock, keep pushing. And then this whole category of other needs, insurance research. We're journalists. We love to research things. And so people signed up to help research insurance options, childcare options. Someone volunteered a room in their house for someone if they were in the tri-state area. I don't know if anyone took them up on it. But the reason why this is important, and the reason why I then decided to put it in a website form, was because I wanted that exact network and support system to be replicable across the country, because I knew that those layoffs were not going to be the last. And unfortunately, now I share this guide every time we see news of media layoffs, which has been 5 times in the last 2 weeks. And I probably missed some. So the idea here is that I created a guide with templates. It's all based in Google Forms and Google Docs, so that people in different communities can replicate the Community Aid Network. Because I, Katherine, did not want to be like responsible for dividing community aid to people I don't know in communities I don't live. We know that mutual aid is strongest when people who are in the community, or even like alum of the paper who that is affected, kind of head it up. So the Journalism Community Aid Network website has kind of become the catch-all space for, here's how to create a layoff aid network, and also here's what to do if you're laid off, as well as journalism job hunting resources. So that's kind of how it began. And we just learned so much in this process. And I can't underscore enough what Leslie said, that a layoff is not indicative of your work ethic, your ability as a person, your worth as a person. If we are the 3 people who tell you that, Like, great. I want everyone to know that, because we discovered in this process of creating the community aid network that there is still so much shame and isolation and embarrassment, and it doesn't need to be that way. So I also just wanted to add something about the narrative. You mentioned kind of in your question that we like to tell stories and tell people what's happening. I think it's important when you're laid off that you decide how to craft your own narrative. Some people go straight to social media. That's okay. You don't have to do that if you don't want to, but I would always urge people not to burn bridges. Share the news if you want to, share that you are looking for a new job, share the link to your CV or your website, but try not to burn bridges. It could literally be part of your severance agreement not to do that, but you owning that narrative and going public with it if you want to has been a way that I've seen people really reclaim their power and reclaim their space after such a life-shattering event. So I just wanted to add that when we're talking about what to do in the first hours and days after the layoff.
So again, to plug your site, to plug SPJ on the website, we have a link to your community aid network. We have a link to Leslie's list of what you can anticipate and how you feel. I find that even for me in other situations, reading how the body reacts to something makes you feel like you're not losing your mind, that you're like not insane. And again, Patricia's very well thought out planning of where all the places you need to look and read again, because we know a lot of those things are not written in English, to make sure that you're taking advantage of the resources that could be available to you. I want to briefly touch on what Patricia said, because I am personally connect with this. Can you talk a little bit about stressing the availability of unemployment? And the reason why I say this is because when COVID happened, and I believe I had to, not comparing this to anyone, I'm just giving this as an example of how I feel or felt at the time. I was not paid for, I believe, a month or something like that. And I had to go and file for unemployment. And I remember telling my husband that I'm not going to go do that because I felt that I was in a better situation than so many other people. I didn't have the right, I felt, to go ask for that assistance. And he said, well, wait a second, you pay into that when you're working. And so Patricia, can you weigh in on this with, actual professional language and reason other than just my feelings blabbering? Because I really want people to walk away feeling empowered to go ask for help, because that help, they've earned it.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that. I think there is a myth out there that if someone files for unemployment, it goes against their record somewhere. But it is a benefit for you. And so the sooner you apply, the better. If someone tells you to delay applying, go and apply. Secondarily, one of the things that I think all of us, even myself right now, like I can't remember dates of employment. I'm like, I don't remember. I remember the year, but making sure your records match your employer records, that will expedite and hopefully shorten that payment, window process. The assumption is if you are laid off, you should get unemployment benefits, but you want to make sure that you've asked that question of your employer so that they're not fighting the unemployment. It typically in all states, it should be automatic, but making sure that you and your employer are on the same page of completing that. But again, to your point, you should do it, and it is not something that should go against you. And the sooner you can apply for it, don't wait. If you're like, but it's this far out, the sooner you can get that record started, the better.
Leslie, I wanted to go back to you and ask you probably the impossible, the unfair question. Top 5 things that people can do right now after they've listened to us, hopefully, that would help them maybe refocus, maybe rewrite the narrative, even for a brief moment, in their head, right? Because it's on repeat, maybe for some top 5 things that they could do. And maybe they can repeat them doing those 5 things, right? To get back on track, whatever that track may be, whether leaving journalism, looking for another job, whatever. Wellness, we're talking.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks so much for asking that. Actually, I wrote a book called Journalists Break News, Don't Let It Break You. And in the book, I write about my human method. And so the human method was something that I created after, not related to a layoff. I had an emotional breakdown in 2015, right before a live shot. And I really got to thinking, we should be humans first, journalists second. And that perfectly applies here, right? Being human first. And so when we think about human, human, it's the perfect little roadmap to help anyone, whether you're a journalist or not. H is to hold space, right? To take some time to check in. Katherine said something really great. Don't burn the bridges. The anger might be there and the frustration. You might want to take it to social media and trash the company, and maybe they do deserve it, maybe they don't, who knows? But taking that moment to just, okay, we're going to shut everything and we're just going to be with family right now, however long you have the capacity to take. So hold space for you. Take some time to just check in. Letter U, understand what your stress response is. How do you respond to stress? Do you get sad? Do you get angry? Do you start to avoid people? Do you start to avoid being by yourself? Really take into account and take notice of how do you respond to stress. The M, I like this one, manifest your magic. So remember to check in. There could be a lot of shame associated with this. And so I quite literally, when imposter syndrome starts to come up, when shame, thoughts of you're not good enough start to come up, I take a piece of paper and write down, what are all of my wins that I've had in my career? What are all of the good things I've done? The awards, the differences I've made in community, the sources I've built, the stories I've done, even if they didn't get an award, something I'm really proud of. Manifesting that magic, that confidence, and reminding yourself you are enough. And then A, aligning with your resourcing tools. So what does that mean for you? Aligning means getting back on track, right? For you, maybe yoga is not what helps you recenter. Maybe it's dancing. Maybe it's just going for a walk. Maybe it's just hanging out on the couch with your family, with your kiddos, with your animals. It's petting your cats, watering your plants. How do you realign back into a state of regulation? And then that letter N is nurturing that wellness plan, basically taking all of the letters HUMAN and saying, okay, this is my mental wellness plan. This is what I can always rely on, and take it and do it, and do a little journaling exercise. How do I hold space for myself? How do I understand my stress response? How am I going to manifest my magic? How am I going to align with my resourcing? And then what's my wellness plan that'll help nurture through that? So you asked for 5, I've given you 5.
That was magic. And I'm thinking to myself, ooh, which ones of those have I done? I need to do all of them. Wow. I have one little diddly to add to the first point you were making, and the point that Katherine made, which was don't burn bridges. I get super hot. I get hot and I get feelings. And when I find that instead of start writing it on whichever social platform or in an email that will then already has an address where it's going, you just write it down somewhere. If you need to email it to yourself, if you need to write it out on a piece of paper, whatever it is, that might help. And if after that you feel that all of it needs to go down in a beautiful fire, then that's the choice that you can make. But those are some of at least the tricks that I've played on my mind, saying, okay, write it down and walk away.
Yeah. And that's
And
actually a releasing anger technique. And so if folks want to go onto our SPJ site and look at all the resources that you help put together, Anastasia, that one in particular, I like to call it the FU letter. Now, again, don't send it, or maybe send it.
No.
Be
Right.
safe, just write it on paper,
Yes.
maybe not an e-version, but
Yeah.
it's a way to let that out. And so I put in a journaling exercise with prompts on how to do the FU letter. It's very effective.
The title of it, as Patricia knows, just warms my heart. It's one of my favorite words. Um,
Can I add
Catherine.
something? Can I
Yes,
add
I was,
something to
yeah,
that
yeah,
real
please. I was going to
quickly?
go to you anyway. Yeah.
Oh, great. Well, I just wanted to point, like, also underline the first part of what Leslie said, which I think is so important because we journalists like to take our job and make it our whole personality. And then when one of them gets ripped away, it gets really hard to untangle. And what you said was really powerful. You said human first, journalist second. And we're all trying to do that when we're covering stories, when we're doing features, and we're covering horrible breaking news. But it's important to do that after a layoff too, because we think that our job defines our soul, and like we get really high and mighty about it. And I love that about us. But we are people without the job. And it's really, really important to remember that. And like, if it's not horribly traumatic, I agree with Leslie, take some time to figure out, okay, who am I? You can be a journalist without being on staff in a newsroom at the exact moment, but you need to know who you are. And I helped a lot of people through that after the layoffs. It was people who'd been at the company for 35 years. I mean, untangling your identity from that job is really hard, and it's a lot of work, but the people who did it came out better on the other side, and they came out better journalists, and they came out better people. So I just wanted to underscore how important that is. Thank you, Leslie. You had a question for me though, so please go ahead.
No, I love that you weighed in without even a prompt. Shocking, right? Journalists and
Journalists, you know,
yes, we just weigh in.
we love
Um,
to talk.
right. What I was going to ask you is really the same thing. Like through your work on this, top 5 things that either people should be doing or asking, or we're doers, right? Like you get up in the morning, like, what's my story? Who am I calling? What's the other side of that? So because we're doers, I'm asking you that specific question, but maybe I'm framing it wrong. Maybe that's not what most people asked you for help about. So you drive the bus and tell me what the 5 things that people maybe should know from your experience.
I do
Mhm.
not have a 5-letter acronym ready to whip out, nor have I read or written a book about this.
She's
Um,
winning. She is
so
winning. I've
that's
read her book.
amazing.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
agree with everything you said. The things that I would think about actually start before a layoff, like
Mm.
understanding that we are in horrible times at sometimes in journalism, that things are precarious and they are hard to acknowledge and they're hard to deal with. Sometimes going on social media is like, I know this is going to tank my mood. Why am I doing this anyway? But as such, acknowledging that, have the resume ready, have the personal portfolio, download your work from online. There's an example today of a news website that laid off 300 people and closed the site. And so the access to all those people's work is gone. And so when you do great things, write them down. Add a section to your resume, even if you don't keep it on there, of the awards you've gotten. Keep a running log, not on your work computer, not in your work email, of those things. Keep those PDFs. Understand in your severance agreement how you can use those PDFs. That is not necessarily always your property. Understand what your company's take is on forwarding work emails, downloading work documents. You can get in trouble sometimes if you use something like Google Takeout. So ask those questions when the layoff is happening, when you have time to. I realize you're not going to go into the layoff meeting saying, hey, and like, what do I do with my work
Yeah.
email
Yeah.
files?
Is it cool? Is it cool if I, yeah.
Just a quick question,
Yeah.
right? So that comes later, but at the same time, you lose access to those things. You'll lose access to Slack or Teams, or maybe your source sheets. Maybe you need to transfer ownership or make other people owners of those things. And I know that's all just like super boring and logistical, but it's important to keep in mind and to have the backup for yourself, because if you're going to stay in the same area, you're going to want the mayor's personal cell phone number. And if you're going to do work in that state, you're going to need the PIO's email address for the Department of Education. And so those are very, very like grounding things. You can start doing that while you are on the job. Again, making sure that you are complying with your company's technology and use policy, so you're not crossing any lines there. But the other thing that I would say, I think that's like what, two or three things.
I stopped counting a while ago. Go ahead. It's all good. It's good stuff.
Some of them are small things, but but then immediately after the layoff, crafting that narrative, deciding what you want to do. Do you want to keep being full-time? If you've been working full-time for a newspaper for 35 years, it can be easy to be like, oh, I need to find another job as an editor. There are a lot of freelancing options out there, and maybe that creates a better lifestyle for you. Do you want to go back to school? Like, those are questions that we don't really allow ourselves to ask a lot of times when we're like in the trenches in a job. I never want to like put a layoff in a positive light ever, because it really doesn't feel like that. But maybe it's a time to do some self-reflection on your career and your direction. And I know people who did it. I know people who were laid off and left journalism, and I know people who moved across the country to stay in journalism. So, changing your social media bios, letting people know that you're looking for work. Those are kind of important parts of moving forward and moving on. So I hope that that's helpful.
No, I think these are all great points. I would add to that, you said social media, I'd say LinkedIn, right? Like, I was with one particular company for 15 years, and that's how Patricia and I met. And I've since left being on television, but I often reflect now, I'm like, I didn't save any of my stories. What was I thinking? Was I thinking that I was going to do this forever?
Yes.
I am not right. I'm not comparing myself, by no means. I'm comparing myself to people who've been laid off. I left on my own accord, but I 100% felt that I am the person, the journalist person. So when Leslie is saying these things, I'm like, oh my God, this is like all the alarm bells. Like, it's like, I don't know, a 20 alarm bell fire in my head. I didn't save anything. I didn't put any effort into LinkedIn. And when I logged on when it was time, like, okay, what do I put on there? Right. So all of these things are so important. And I'm glad that you mentioned it. So I want to ask Patricia a question that, shocking, she may or may not be able to answer. Back to my reporting roots. Are there, when Katherine was saying, you really have to be maybe not prepared for a layoff necessarily, not to interpret Katherine's words incorrectly, but sort of see the state of media. Are there signs that we, as hopefully smart, educated, paying attention people, we could see that a company may be going in that direction before you read it in the New York Times or before an HR person has a meeting? Can we tell that it could be happening?
So that's a great question. And it's hard to answer because I don't want people constantly looking for things and then maybe feeling fear every day, so to speak. So I want to be thoughtful about those comments. But what I would say is, and I think both Leslie and Katherine had such great examples of what I would call preventative care. So preventative care for your own well-being, preventative care for the resources that you have accessible to you. But all organizations, and especially media organizations, follow, very closely these quarterly cycles, right? So looking at the finances, the flow, what type of spending is happening or being cut based on that quarterly flow, I think can be at times quite telling of like, things are getting really tight. We've now gone for 6 months with a hiring freeze or something of that nature. So looking at maybe those quarterly indicators, but I think my preference would be, rather than looking for those, is just have your plan. So have your well-being plan. I love Katherine, talked about policies and so forth. Do you have an electronic copy of your handbook? Because you might very well need that, and and that detailed information. Do you have a resource list available? Some employees don't even know what their insurance is, right? So really putting together kind of that, I don't want to call it the to-go bag, but it's a little
That
like your
sounds
to-go bag.
terrible.
I
Yes.
know
That
but
sounds terrible.
you're ready. You're like, I
Yeah.
don't, whatever, when it happens, because
Yeah.
even in the moment is so difficult. Even if you saw the warning signs, it's going to be difficult, but just putting your prevention in place, so that it, one step might be a little bit easier. Like you verified they have the right records. One thing that popped in my head, and I won't go too far off track, but there are employees whose employee records aren't right. And so maybe their severance is based on their years of service, and the employer doesn't have, well, you actually were here and were eligible for a bridge of service, and their service was reduced. So some of those preventative things to make sure your records are in order with your employer and that you have access to things that you might need will make things much easier when the challenging moment might face you as well.
And so is the solution to making sure that your years of service are accurate is reaching out to your HR person and say, can you tell me what it says in your computer if you don't have access to, whatever digital records for the company? Can you tell me when I started to make sure that it matches with your recollection? Is that what you do?
Yeah, I would definitely recommend that. There's depending on the organization, they may have digital version of your records that you can review, but often it's a phone call. And you guys are journalists, so go in there, be like, I worked this time. I see in the handbook there's a bridge of service policy.
What is a bridge
Did
of
I get
service? Sorry, I
so that
interrupted you.
so where you may have worked, left, and came back? And so your seniority might be longer, and so you might get a longer severance package. So, so that, and do they have that reflected in your records? So,
But is the bridge of service something that you went and worked for someone else, or is it a bridge of service that you went on a maternity leave, or you took short-term or long-term disability? What
it
is
could be
that?
all of
Oh,
those things. I was
oh,
primarily using the example of I worked for an organization, left, worked for a different one, then came back 3 years later,
okay.
and making sure they have the correct record and are applying the right policy to your records. But also, how was your severance calculated? Did they reduce your amount because you were on maternity leave?
Mm.
A, is that legal?
Hmm.
B, is that their, so looking at all of those types of employee records, I think is important. So final word on that question is just that preventative. So you're not in fear, but you're like, I feel like I've got at least a good portion of my kit ready for myself.
I also wanted to add that a similar situation to what Patricia is talking about. We see it in media a lot where you move from one paper to another in a company or from one station to another. And if they're owned by the same company, are they taking your previous experience at a different site into account with your severance? And a small plug to try to negotiate. You might not always succeed, but you are out the door. So it's not like you have really anything to lose. If you're making sure that those numbers are correct and making sure all of, if you had an internship with the company, does that count toward your severance? So just adding to that, it's a great point. And it's unfortunately something I think a lot of people don't think about when you're just in it and you're in the trenches and you're trying to figure out what's going to happen and why this is happening.
I probably should have reiterated this in the beginning. I just, I guess I wasn't sure where we're going to go exactly, but we want people to stay in journalism. That's what we want to do, right? Where we're not advocating anybody leave or change or change path. I mean, if this is what you're called to do, then that's what you're going to call to do. But we're here because we love the profession. We're passionate about this profession. We're either in it actively or we were supporting it, like Patricia. So we really want people to go and seek those resources that all the three of you were so generous to provide SPJ. So hopefully they will help. I don't want to make this extraordinarily long because this is complicated and I have, shocker, so many additional questions. But I will just ask one last one to all three of you, and you guys can take it at whichever order you would like. Just final thoughts, right? Whatever you want to leave folks with that is this helpful, supportive, that they could take away and use.
I can go first. I think I cannot overstate how important community is. Community, community, community. We're here for you. If someone needs help, send me a DM. If I can't help you, I know someone who can. And to your point, absolutely. Journalism is important, right? It's so important. And also, journalism roles all look different. So it doesn't mean you have, if you were a reporter, it doesn't mean you have to stay a reporter. You can think of other journalism adjacent professions. There's so many opening up right now, which is interesting, right? Because of what we're seeing. And so I see it as like traditional shifting to a little bit different. And so journalism is absolutely important, but also be open-minded about those journalism adjacent roles and rely on your community. We're here for you.
I can go next because I have something not so rosy and then rosy. And it's something that on the not so rosy end, I think it's important to recognize that like all of the resources that we have shared are for people who are victimized by this process, right? And like there is someone who is doing that victimization, and whether at worst it's mismanagement, and at best it might be bad economic factors, that our media industry is continually victimizing people with this. And so I don't want all of our resources to be portrayed as like, well, you know, it is what it is, and here's what you can do to take care of yourself, because like self-care can only go so far when this industry is exploitative and victimizes people. And so like I want to give space to that. That's the not so rosy part, and I just want to acknowledge that. The rosy side of that is that there is such a strong and like fervent community of journalists, many of whom have been laid off. Most industries have a Facebook group for people who have been laid off by that company, and that is terrible. I wish that it never happened. But there is strength in that, and there's community in that, and there's healing in that. And so I want to hold both of those truths here. The purpose of our discussion is obviously to help people deal with the realities of this, and the realities are horrible, but there is a path forward, and I hope that everyone uses these resources and stays in journalism, because as you all know, it is so vitally important, the work that we do. And I wish that we didn't have to have conversations like this, but I'm glad that we can.
Yeah, thank you.
So I literally am almost going to echo a similar message. So it'll almost be like 1, 2, 3. You heard this from three folks. And that is what breaks my heart under a layoff is when someone does isolate themselves. So they isolate themselves from their family, their community. And really, I do want to echo how important there may be days, you know, that you that's good for you. That's what you should do that day, but reach out and know that there is a community that's supporting you with resources. And that really is, for me, the foundation for, we want journalism to continue. This is important for all of our communities. So recognizing that you're not alone in that, and if you know someone, another journalist or a family or a friend that might be going down that isolation path, share some of these resources with them so we can keep them connected.
Absolutely. You guys, it's not my place. I can't add anything. Is there anything else anyone wants to say? We unfortunately may have to continue these conversations because that's the place where we're at right now. But for the moment, is there anything else? Again, everything is available in SPJ, all the resources, everything we talked about. But yeah, go ahead.
Shocker. I have one more thing to add, that I just wanted to throw out there. If you are not impacted by a layoff, that is when you can do a lot of the hard work that people who are cannot. So using that that template for creating a community aid network, organizing it for a paper or a station or an organization in your community, that is what it's there for. And it's not designed to be headed up by someone who is dealing with a layoff. It's supposed to be for someone who is outside of that. So if you feel helpless, like I do, when a media organization lays people off, consider starting aid for that organization and setting it up, because we have to keep supporting each other.
Our community and our democracy depends on it, right?
Great.
Yes. Oh,
Good
feelings. Okay. You guys, you're amazing and incredible and so giving, and thank you so much for bringing all of your expertise and feelings and wisdom. And we just really hope that it helps anyone out there who is dealing with this. And yeah, reach out. All of our, I'm easily found. All of us are easily found, and we can connect. So until next time, whenever that is a next time, thank you so much, all of you, for being here. Thanks. Bye.